I'm a young game developer, and in today's video I'm gonna make a space survival game. First thing I did was make the Unity project, and it was pretty easy. I just made a new Unity project, set it to 2D, named Destroy Void, and created the project. With the project made, I imported the game assets. The game assets I imported were a spaceship for the player, a purple space background with stars, and a brown and gray asteroid. After importing all the game assets, I added the background into the game and changed its draw mode to tiled and resized it to fit the game screen. Then I added the spaceship into the game and put it at the bottom of the screen. With the player added, I made a new folder for the scripts and added a player movement script into the folder and put it into the player. In the player movement system, I have a speed variable set to 5 and a screen half width variable set to the screen width. In the start function, I made a new private float variable to get half of the player's width, and I set the screen half width variable to the camera's aspect ratio times its orthographic size and subtracted player half width from it. Then in the update function, I made a new private variable called horizontal input to see if the A, D, left or right keys are pressed on the keyboard. Below that, I set the vector2 variable called position to get the player's position and change it by the horizontal input times speed times delta time. After that, I clamped the player's X position if it's on each side of the screen, so the player can't leave the screen, and finally I set the player's position to position. With the player movement code made, I tried it out and it worked. Now that you can avoid the asteroids by moving, I made an asteroid to actually avoid. Then I made a move asteroid script that pretty much made the asteroids always go down, and if it's below a certain position, destroy it. And it actually worked on the first try when I tested it. But one asteroid is too easy. So I duplicated the asteroid, changed its sprite to a brown asteroid, and set its speed to 5. Thus having 2 asteroids is also boring, so I made spawn points and made the asteroid spawning script. In the spawning script, I made a game object variable for the gray asteroid and the brown asteroid. I also added an integer variable for what asteroids would spawn. Below the integer, I have a transform array for all the spawn points positions and 2 variables, one for next spawn spine and the other for time between spawns. In the start function, I set the integer for the type of meteors to spawn a random number from 0 to 1. I'll get into what those numbers mean later. The other thing I have in the start function is setting the time between spawns to a random number from 0 to 3. Finally, in the update function, I made the actual spawning script with an if statement saying if time.time is more than next spawn time and the one enemy variable is 0, spawn the gray meteor at a random spawn points location. After that, I set the next spawn time to time.time plus time between spawns. Then I changed the next enemy that spawns to enemy 1, which is the brown meteor. Right below that, I set the time between spawns variable to a random number from 0 to 3. Then I duplicated the if statement and changed it to the brown meteor spawning. When I went back into the game and tested it out, everything seemed to be working well. With the player working well, I gave the player a collider so he could actually lose the game when you collided with the meteors. Then I made a game over script, and in it I made a game object variable for the game over screen canvas. In the start function, I set the time scale to 1. In the update function, I checked if the player pressed the spacebar and if the game over canvas is showing. If so, reload the game. Then below that, I checked if the player was colliding with an object. If so, I showed the game over screen and set the time scale to 0. Now that we have collision in the game, I tested it out and it worked. With collisions working, the last thing I had to do was the score, and it was pretty easy. Now that the score is done, so is the whole game. So what you're looking at right now is the final game. If you want to try out the game, there will be a link in the description. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. See ya!